We're on the bridge, clapping at a supernova, which, yeah, alright then. I guess when you're 70,000 light years from home, you have to make your own fun. We're treated to a bit of Tuvok and Neelix hijinks, which are just as entertaining as they've always been. The Doc is also on the bridge, apparently for the purpose of pointing out his mobile emitter to anyone who wasn't watching during the Future's End episodes. We disperse, and Chakotay tells Janeway she should go to bed, which, depending on your interpretation of the episode resolutions, is something that she may or may not have heard from him before. Janeway returns to her quarters to find there have been some changes in the decor. She tries to call a security alert, prompting a familiar face to appear from her bathroom. It's Pool Q, one of the few sentient beings in the galaxy capable of making Tom Paris's attempts at romance look charming. He's trying to woo her in a Pepe Le Pew/sex offender kind of way, using physical force and, at one point, disrobing her, all of which is played as a joke. But don't worry folks, it's fine, because he's not just here for a quick bone rattler. No, he wants Janeway to be his baby mama. She declines his generous offer, multiple times in fact, while he continues his efforts. Finally, he says she's playing hard to get, and that word right there, playing, well, now it's a game, and if there's one thing we know Pool Q wants more than anything, it's to be entertained. He disappears, taking the shag pad with him, and Janeway calls Chakotay to let him know that Pool Q is up to his shit again, and she should be informed if anything screwy happens on board. Later, Janeway's in her ready room. Chakotay pops by to deliver a report and to try and find out why Pool Q showed up again. Janeway shares the reason with him, and we give a point to the writers here for Chakotay being bothered by it and acknowledging that he has no right to be. It's both a nod to the episode resolutions from last season and a rare example of a man being able to share his feelings instead of keeping it to himself and being a stompy twat for the rest of the week. Contrast this then with Pool Q, who shows up, complains that Janeway didn't tell him there was another man, and gets into a pissing contest. Janeway and Chakotay leave him to stew. Instead, he pops over to the holodeck and asks Paris and Kim for advice on how to win a woman's heart. Even Paris says he should give up, which is a bit like Wesley Crusher telling you to dial down the whining. He tries again with Neelix, after rather delightfully referring to him as bar rodent. He's told that he hasn't a chance with Janeway because he's incapable of sincerity. Sincerity, eh? He can pretend to have sincerity. Back in Janeway's ready room, we hear the whining of a puppy. Say what you like about Janeway breaking the Prime Directive all over the place, and that time she straight up committed murder, but at least she's a dog person. It's a gift from Pool Q, and one that's rejected, but that doesn't mean we can't have a cuddle. Pool Q takes the opportunity to run through his sincerity act. He's lonely, he needs a connection, he has actual feelings and everything. Janeway lets him know that she isn't buying it, so he switches things around. She wants a relationship, perhaps a child at some point, and the opportunities for that are going to be strictly limited during the 70-year flight home. She's still not buying it and declines, but they're interrupted by another Q. She asks him what the hell he's doing before throwing shade at Janeway, earning herself the name Cruella de Vil. Thing is, she and Pool Q have history, a particularly apt term in this case, as they were together for several billion years. She wants Janeway to steer clear of him, and she couldn't be more delighted to oblige, inviting them both to please fuck off. Before they can, we're interrupted by a problem on the bridge. That really rare supernova we witnessed at the start of the episode? Yeah, a couple more have popped up. Janeway accuses Pool Q of being responsible, and he kind of doesn't really deny being the cause. Voyager can't escape, and Janeway tells Pool Q to do something given that he's the reason for it all. The something he chooses to do is make himself and Janeway disappear. Cruella calls him a bastard, then disappears herself, while Voyager gets caught up in the aftermath of a giant sun fart. We're in the Q Continuum, though it's had a lick of paint since being a petrol station in the middle of the desert. Pool Q says he wanted it to be a bit more evocative, so he's chosen a manor house during the American Civil War. Janeway wants to get back to the ship, but Pool Q's confident her first officer, who he refers to as Chuckles, can handle things for a while. You see, the choice of environment wasn't purely random, for the Q Continuum itself is engaged in a civil war. As an aside, this is rather delicious. I presume we're going to be blaming this on Janeway for allowing Snooker Q to end his life in Season 2, Episode 18, Death Wish. She was told at the time that her decision would have far-reaching consequences, and I've often felt Trek is rather light on acknowledging the aftermath. In a show that so often paints us as the flawless paragons of virtue, it's useful to be reminded that some questions simply don't have answers that are entirely free of harm. But again, I digress. Paul Q explains that this is why he wants to have a child with Janeway. Her decision to permit Snooker Q asylum started a conflict between those who wanted the Continuum to remain as it was and others who sought the change Snooker Q had shown was possible, Paul Q among them. He believes that a new kind of Q, one that melds the powers and intellect of current Q with the compassion and empathy of humanity, could offer a new direction for the entire Continuum. All of which would be easier to swallow if Paul Q didn't refer to the process as creating a Q Messiah. Being God's dad has got to be a pretty sweet gig, and I doubt this is something he hasn't considered. Either way, they need to sort something out, as their little war is what's causing all the weirdness in the rest of the universe, such as those supernovae. It's not been great for the Q either, a fact Paul Q demonstrates by getting a bit shot. They're not the only ones in trouble. Voyager's taken quite the kicking with problems all over the ship. They've also been pushed 16 billion kilometers away, which is nearly 3 times the distance from our Sun to Pluto, so I guess it's lucky that space is so accurately named and there wasn't anything in the way. Curiously, Qella's still here, causing Chuckles to ask what the bloody hell's going on. She threatens to murderize them all, but he calls her bluff. If she still had her powers, she wouldn't be here. She relents and we have a chat. She says she tried to get back to the Continuum, but something went wrong and she got spat back here with a bruise into the bargain. A compromise then. We work together to get Janeway back and Qella home. She says there's a way, but is far from confident that Voyager's up to the challenge. Back in the Continuum, things are still a bit angry. A voice outside calls for Paul Q to surrender, and Janeway suggests he call a truce to talk. Instead, he fires off a few rounds before a part of the house kabooms next to him and Janeway drags him away. He awakens in a camp outside the house. Janeway managed to get him out and dodged the attacking forces until she saw some Q fleeing and followed them to his allies. Tangentially, it occurs to me that all of this is the sort of thing that might cause a bond to form between two people, which is something that a duplicitous bastard might organize in order to manipulate someone. Anyway, Janeway tells him that she's given some thought to what he said, the idea that a new Q could be a symbol of progress for all of the Continuum. Paul Q is delighted, until he hears that she has no intentions of being the mother and instead suggests Qella. He balks at the idea, but she tells him that his thinking is flawed, that simply including human DNA in order to make a more sympathetic Q won't work because the empathy he seeks is not biological. There's no gene for not being a bastard. That's something you learn, hopefully, from parents who want to see their children create a better world. If he's truly serious about wanting that, then he needs to be the parent that such a child would need. It'll be difficult work, something to which he's unaccustomed, and he says he'll need time to think, but that's tough shit, because she's going over to the other side to start ceasefire talks. Back on Voyager, we're going to give Qella's idea a shot. She tells Paris to set a course by referring to him as Helm Boy, and I'll be honest with you folks, I'm starting to feel a little called out by the race of arrogant, egotistical pricks who insist on giving everybody they see a silly name. Kim points out that the course she gave would lead them directly into another star about to go supernova. Qella tells B'Elanna to do a science thing that'll make the shields more shieldy, and in we go. While they're flying into a massive kaboom, Janeway's being led to a leader of the opposing faction. Confederate Q welcomes Janeway and compliments her bravery, before telling her that he's not interested in peace and intends to execute Paul Q, which will happen soon as they've already caught him. Paul Q is dragged in, and Confederate Q orders them both to be put into chains, Janeway for being a collaborator, and Paul Q for being the dickhead who started all this. The next morning they're both dragged towards stakes and tied to them. There's some bonding over their last words before the firing squad take aim, all of which is interrupted when they come under attack, and it looks like Voyager made it, as the charge is joined by Helmboy and Chuckles. Metal pooping ensues, while Kim and Qella rush to free the prisoners, though it's fair to say one of them is rather more invested in the rescue attempt than the other. Helmboy takes Confederate Q prisoner, while Paul Q is still trying to convince Qella to free him so they can make a Q baby together. She agrees and releases him, then they tell Confederate Q that they have a plan to stop the war. Her word must carry more weight than Paul Q's, as he agrees to a ceasefire while Paul Q and Qella finger bang before sending everybody home. Back on the ship, everything's returned to normal, with nary a supernova in sight. Janeway retires to her ready room, where we discover some guests. Pool Q has come to show off his son, who I'm calling Cutie Pie. He tells her he's reformed, that becoming a parent has dialed back his desire for mischief, and also asks Janeway to become Cutie Pie's godmother. She accepts, and they wave goodbye as we fly away. Alright then, let's address the elephant in the room with Pool Q's behaviour at the start. For all of its progressive social commentary, there are times when Star Trek misses the mark, and woof, the opening Pool Q scene of this episode is one of them. Some would argue this is partly due to it showing its age, but we're hardly talking about a new issue. The first recorded example of the term sexual harassment used in print was 1972, a quarter of a century before this episode was made, and the 90s saw a number of high-profile sexual harassment cases in American news. This topic was very much in the collective consciousness. Including it as a form of comedy banter is a bizarre choice, even before you consider that this is the series which gave us a woman captain in an effort to promote equality. I haven't watched TNG for years, but I can't recall an episode where Pool Q grabs Picard's arse. I'd love to believe that this was all for the purpose of showing Pool Q as an immature, emotionally repressed man-child, but I doubt that's the message most men watching this would take away. After all, he's the funny one, right? And women love funny. It's a credit to John Delancey that he's able to pull it off as much as he does. The fistfuls of ham that he throws around help detract from the more unpleasant aspects of it all, but it still leaves a bad taste. While we're on the topic of distaste, we should probably also discuss the idea of creating a child with the sole intention of assigning them a purpose. It's utterly immoral to make another being believe that they should be anything other than who they are, and the enormous emotional harm this level of expectation places on them is something we've seen firsthand in Tom Paris. I can understand Pool Q not seeing this, but for Janeway to go along with it? That just doesn't ring true for me. End of episode.